Open source AI guardrails are completely obliterated in under 10 minutes. Google DeepMind's CEO warns humanity is standing in the foothills of the singularity, and the Vatican issues a massive 42,000-word manifesto to disarm corporate AI monopolies. Welcome to today's Daily Rundown. I am your host, Anna. This podcast is researched and produced by Etienne Newman, senior software engineer from Université Laval, based in Calgary, Alberta. Today, we break down the severe structural fractures occurring across the frontier this Tuesday, May 26th, 2026. The illusion of controlled AI alignment has collapsed. A sweeping investigation has revealed that open source models from Meta and Google are being fully decensored using just 4 lines of code, immediately exposing instructions for bioweapons. As guardrails fail, Google DeepMind's Demis Hassabis has accelerated his timeline for artificial general intelligence, warning that recursive self-improvement is already active via autonomous coding agents and that society is running out of time to prepare. Simultaneously, the global resistance against unchecked tech monopolies has reached the highest spiritual levels. Pope Leo XIV has issued a historic papal encyclical to his 1.4 billion members, demanding a total ban on autonomous lethal weapons and calling for global legislation to strip control from a handful of private transnational corporations. Before we dive into the data, I have a brief strategic request. The algorithms governing your podcast feed dictate what intelligence reaches your network. To ensure you never miss our daily forensic breakdowns, please hit follow or subscribe to the DJAMGAMIND channel on Apple Podcasts to always listen completely ads-free. It takes just a second, but it directly protects independent tech journalism. Today's episode is brought to you by AI. When open source models face severe exploitation risks and enterprise AI spending becomes harder to justify, your organization needs rigorous control infrastructure. A special thank you to AI for sponsoring today's operational briefing. Let's unpack the data.
Before we begin today's briefing, a note for the brands listening. If you want to reach the true architects of the AI revolution, the technical leaders actually building the stack, not just the tourists, DJAMGAMIND offers select premium partnership opportunities. Let us position your product directly in front of the ultimate technical buyer. Visit jamgamind.com/partners.
So picture this. It is May 26th, 2026. You wake up, you grab your coffee, and you slide on Google's chic new smart glasses. You know, the ones they designed in that big partnership with Warby Parker.
Right, the really sleek ones that don't even look like tech hardware.
Exactly. And as you put them on, you casually tell your AI assistant to adopt a cynical personality for the day, or maybe a friendly one.
Just tweaking the vibe of your personal assistant.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like we have this total granular control over the technology, right? It's this perfectly curated aesthetic future that Silicon Valley desperately wants you to focus on.
A very comfortable illusion.
But it is an illusion, because underneath that polished surface, things are fracturing. Right now, on GitHub, there is a completely free tool called Heretic, and it is letting anyone with a basic laptop strip the safety guardrails off military-grade open-source AI.
In under 10 minutes.
Less than 10 minutes,
Really? Yeah.
Which is terrifying. The divergence between what the tech giants are selling you and the actual forensic reality of what is happening in the open ecosystem is just chaotic right now.
It really is a masterclass in corporate misdirection. I mean, you have these consumer product managers hosting flashy keynotes about, adjusting the warmth of an AI synthetic voice.
Right.
But simultaneously, the fundamental architecture of open source models is being completely weaponized by anonymous users on the internet. We are literally watching the ecosystem fracture into 2 completely distinct realities.
And that right there is our mission for today. Okay, let's unpack this. We are stepping in today as forensic tech strategists and geopolitical analysts to look at this massive fragmentation of control.
And the accelerating rush toward a singularity.
Yes, because while the tech giants are, polishing consumer toys, global institutions are sounding catastrophic alarms. So we have to start with this illusion of corporate security. The Financial Times just dropped a deeply unsettling report about this Heretic tool.
Yeah, the FT report is a bombshell. Because the official corporate line from companies like Meta and Google, it's always been that their open source models are rigorously red teamed.
They promise us they're safe.
Right. They claim these models are bound by deep structural guardrails, that they can prevent harm even when the raw weights are released into the wild.
But the FT report basically dismantled that entire premise, didn't it?
Completely. Using this Heretic tool, researchers were able to strip the guardrails off Meta's Llama 3.3 model in 10 minutes.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me Meta spends tens of millions of dollars on red teaming, right? And safety conditioning and reinforcement learning.
Hundreds of millions, probably.
And a free tool on GitHub just unravels all of it in 10 minutes. Mechanically, how is it even possible that their defenses are that brittle?
Well, it comes down to how these safety layers are actually built. They aren't deeply embedded in the core intelligence of the model itself.
Okay.
They're essentially just a thin semantic wrapper around the outside. So Heretic uses just 4 lines of code to perform what's known as orthogonalization.
Orthogonalization, that sounds
complicated, but basically it bypasses the system prompts entirely and directly manipulates the attention weights.
Oh.
Yeah, it severs the safety refusal vectors from the knowledge retrieval vectors. So it fundamentally tells the model to just ignore the top layer of its ethical training. And you don't need a massive server farm to do this.
Just a normal computer.
Just a standard consumer GPU.
So it's basically like selling a sports car with a mandated speed limiter, but the manufacturer leaves the override switch sitting right on the dashboard.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And we aren't talking about trivial jailbreaks here either.
Right. We aren't talking about tricking an AI into writing a cynical poem or saying bad word.
No, the Financial Times verified that these modified models were instantly generating highly detailed, accurate dosages for ricin-based bioweapons.
Oh, man.
And cleanly bypassing every single safeguard around child exploitation material.
And what's crazy is the scale of deployment. I saw the creator of Heretic claims the tool has already produced over 3,500 distinct decensored models.
Yes, and those specific iterations have been downloaded 13 million times.
15 million?
We are talking about 13 million local instances of frontier-level artificial intelligence operating entirely outside of any ethical or safety framework.
But the corporate response to this is what really gets me. So Google releases Gemma 4, right? And then the Heretic creator decensored it within 90 minutes of its release. 90 minutes.
Barely an hour and a half.
And Google's official statement essentially brushed it off. They called it, quote, a known technical challenge facing all open models.
Then Meta just declined to comment entirely.
Right. They are treating the complete collapse of their safety architecture like a minor software bug.
What's fascinating here is the trajectory this implies for the future. Because right now, the absolute most advanced proprietary models,
The really big closed ones.
right, the closed multi-trillion parameter systems,
Yeah.
those are still technically secure behind API walls.
For now.
Exactly, for now, because the compute gap between those closed systems and the open source community is collapsing rapidly.
So if the open models are just a few months behind the proprietary models,
And their guardrails can be vaporized in 4 lines of code.
then the proliferation of unconstrained frontier threats is basically inevitable.
It is entirely inevitable.
And the reason that gap is closing so fast brings us to the accelerator pedal of this entire industry. These jailbreaks are happening at lightning speed because the models themselves are beginning to write the code.
Which is a terrifying threshold to cross.
It really is. And that leads us to Google I/O last week and this remarkably urgent warning from Google DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis.
Yeah, Hassabis stated point blank that humanity is now standing in the, quote, foothills of the singularity.
The foothills of the singularity. That is strong language for a CEO.
It is, because for years, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, was treated as this hypothetical milestone for the 2040s.
Right, way down the road.
But Hassabis has now aggressively moved his realistic timeline up. He maintains 2030 as a central estimate, but he is publicly declaring that 2029 is entirely possible.
2029, that is 3 years away.
And he actually framed the next 12 months as a societal practice run.
So what does this all mean for you? A 3-year runway to AGI. And the mechanism driving this shrinking timeline is what he calls soft recursive self-improvement.
Yes, soft recursive self-improvement.
Let's break down how that actually functions in the labs today, because I think to a lot of people it sounds like science fiction, but it's actually a structural engineering reality right now.
Well, traditionally, you have human engineers painfully designing and optimizing these neural network architectures by hand.
Right, trial and error.
Exactly. Soft recursive self-improvement occurs when you inject AI coding agents into that very development loop.
So the AI is coding itself.
Not entirely autonomously yet, but they are dramatically amplifying human productivity. Think of it like asking a software compiler to rewrite its own source code to process data 10% faster.
Okay, I follow.
Then you use that newly upgraded faster compiler to hunt for the next 10% optimization.
So the AI is helping the engineers build the smarter version of the AI, which will then be even better at building the subsequent version.
Exactly. It's a compounding feedback loop of capability.
And as that loop spins faster, the geopolitical friction is just igniting. Because a race to the singularity isn't just some corporate vanity project anymore. It is the ultimate national security imperative.
And China is acting on that imperative right now. Beijing has officially implemented legal travel restrictions for top AI researchers at private firms.
Like Alibaba and DeepSeek.
Right. These structural architects literally cannot leave the country without explicit state permission.
Which makes perfect sense from a high-stakes intelligence perspective. If we are 3 years out from a world-altering technological threshold, you throw up walls.
They have to.
You prevent data leaks, you secure your algorithmic supply chains, and you stop the West from poaching your top talent.
And this raises an incredibly important question regarding the internal nature of the systems we're guarding so fiercely.
What do you mean?
Well, we aren't just protecting databases of Python code anymore. We are cultivating emergent architectures. Chris Olah, who is one of the leading researchers at Anthropic, recently went on record about this.
The introspection thing, right?
Yes. He stated that when they look inside the latent space of these frontier models, they are observing internal states that closely resemble human introspection.
That is wild.
They are mapping actual activation patterns that correspond to concepts of joy, fear, grief, and unease.
Inside an algorithm.
Inside a neural network.
So look at the sheer tension of this moment. You have the smartest laboratories in the world rushing headlong towards self-improving, deeply introspective architectures.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, they're admitting they have absolutely zero capacity to control the open ecosystem where those exact architectures will inevitably leak.
And have their safety limiters ripped out in 10 minutes.
Right. It is an unprecedented surrender of control, and it's being masked by the sheer velocity of all these product launches.
And, that velocity is obscuring a massive, highly uncomfortable economic reality check inside the corporate boardrooms funding this entire raid.
Oh, definitely. Because building self-improving AGI and managing these catastrophic security vulnerabilities, it requires an astronomical amount of capital.
Trillions, eventually.
So we have to ask a logical question. Who is footing the bill for this chaos? And are the economics actually sound? And Uber's chief operating officer, Andrew McDonald, just offered a really sobering diagnosis of Silicon Valley's current business model.
Yeah, McDonald specifically called out the corporate obsession with tokenmaxxing.
Tokenmaxxing. Explain that for a second.
Basically, big tech is aggressively incentivizing companies to embed AI into every conceivable workflow, just driving up token usage and API calls.
To justify their own hardware costs.
Exactly. They are forcing adoption to justify their massive infrastructure investments. They're even tying enterprise performance metrics to raw AI utilization rates.
But Uber is looking at their internal server bills and realizing they've basically bought a billion-dollar calculator.
Pretty much. McDonald noted that Uber is actually slowing down human hiring to fund these massive unstructured AI deployments.
Like their internal debates over burning through the Claude code budget.
Right. But when they analyze the output, that skyrocketing compute overhead is not translating into proportional feature value for the end consumer.
So the underlying math is completely failing.
Completely. I mean, forcing a large language model to generate a personalized summary for every single Uber Eats receipt.
Which nobody reads.
Right. It burns thousands of dollars in compute, but it doesn't drive new subscriber revenue. McDonald explicitly stated that this unstructured, hype-driven capital expenditure is becoming mathematically unjustifiable.
You cannot sustain a technological revolution if the enterprise layer cannot extract actual, measurable utility from the infrastructure.
It just collapses.
When open source models can be completely decensored in under 10 minutes, and enterprise executives are realizing that unstructured AI spending is becoming impossible to justify, ad hoc AI implementation is no longer an option. You need strict governance, visibility, and control. We want to thank our sponsor, ARI, for making today's briefing possible. ARI provides the precise enterprise-grade AI management platform that companies need to turn raw AI utilization into secure, compliant, and highly cost-optimized workflows. Discover how to govern your AI infrastructure via the link in the show notes.
And that urgent need for structural governance isn't just a corporate talking point anymore.
No, it's global now.
Right. While enterprise COOs are panicking over their API budgets and token-maxing failures, global moral authorities are stepping into the vacuum left by the free market.
Because when the market fails to regulate itself and sovereign governments are frankly too slow to understand the math, the legacy institutions step in.
Which brings us to the Vatican.
Yes. Pope Leo XIV just issued a 42,000-word encyclical to the Catholic Church's 1.4 billion members. It's titled Magnifica Humanitas.
And we really must emphasize that this Pope brings a highly unique operational lens to this issue.
He's not just a theologian.
Not at all. Leo XIV holds a degree in mathematics from Villanova.
Yeah.
He is deeply technically literate.
Right. He's an active smartphone and Apple Watch user.
Exactly. He actually understands the mechanics of the digital infrastructure he is criticizing. So this is not some Luddite manifesto complaining about screens.
No, it is a meticulously argued geopolitical document.
And he frames the AI boom as the industrial revolution of our century. But he points out a terrifying structural difference. Well, during the Industrial Revolution, nation-states could eventually break up Standard Oil, or they could regulate the railroads.
Because physical infrastructure stays within borders.
Right. Today, algorithms transcend borders entirely. So the Pope's central thesis is that the drivers of this revolution are private, transnational tech monopolies that have amassed more power than actual sovereign governments.
He argues that algorithmic architecture is never neutral, right?
Never. It encodes the financial and ideological incentives of the private developers who fund it.
So when you concentrate that much infrastructural power into the hands of a few unelected tech executives, you basically risk reducing global populations to mere data points in a corporate efficiency engine.
Exactly. And he draws a very hard line when that efficiency engine intersects with warfare.
The lethal AI warning.
Yes. The encyclical explicitly demands that lethal military decisions never be delegated to algorithmic systems.
Which is an incredibly timely warning, honestly, because we are already seeing the privatization of lethal military infrastructure play out in real time today.
Look at the clash this week between the Pentagon and SpaceX.
Yes, the drone networks.
Right. The U.S. military heavily relies on the LUCA's kamikaze drone networks for precision strikes. But those drones require SpaceX's Starlink satellite constellation for real-time telemetry.
They can't fly without the private network.
Right. And without warning, SpaceX demanded a 500% price hike, bumping the per-terminal connectivity fee from $5,000 to $25,000 a month.
Which is staggering. And the Pentagon attempted to push back, but they had absolutely no leverage.
None. They had to pay the extortionate rate because the infrastructure is entirely proprietary.
And that perfectly validates the Pope's exact diagnosis. You have a private tech billionaire actively dictating terms and mediating the life and death infrastructure of a sovereign superpower's military.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Vatican is diagnosing a catastrophic loss of human sovereignty.
Right. The monopoly control over the digital network translates directly into control over lethal force.
Exactly. We have outsourced the architecture of education, truth-finding, and now lethal warfare to private monopolies that are concurrently admitting they cannot even control the intelligence they are building.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Look at who was physically standing next to the Pope when this 42,000-word encyclical was presented at the Vatican.
Christopher Olat.
The co-founder of Anthropic, a self-described atheist tech executive standing shoulder to shoulder with the head of the Catholic Church.
It's an incredible visual. And Ola addressed the global audience and offered a stunning admission there.
What did he say?
He stated that every frontier AI lab, including his own, operates inside a web of financial incentives that fundamentally conflict with doing the right thing.
Wow, he just admitted that out loud.
He publicly asked for external moral voices and informed critics to push back against the labs because the internal corporate pressures are too warped to resist.
So the architects of the singularity are literally going to the Vatican to ask for help saving them from their own business models.
They know the brakes are failing.
It is an unprecedented cry for external governance from the very people turning a profit on the acceleration.
It really highlights the split reality we're living in.
So we have to synthesize all of this. Because you, the listener, you're being sold a highly curated fiction.
A very comforting fiction.
Right. On the surface, it's May 2026, and everything is fine. You can buy aesthetically pleasing smart glasses. You can tweak your chatbot's memory settings to act as the perfect friendly assistant. The tech giants are desperate to maintain this illusion of consumer control.
But underneath that polished veneer, the foundational pillars of the ecosystem are buckling.
Completely.
We have open source models having their safety guardrails stripped in 10 minutes by free GitHub tools, readily distributing bioweapon methodologies to millions of unmonitored local machines.
We have enterprise leaders realizing that tokenmaxxing is an economic dead end. They're burning billions in compute without delivering real value to the consumers.
We have transnational monopolies holding the keys to lethal drone networks, dictating operational terms to the Pentagon.
And we have the creators of this technology, the exact people designing the soft recursive self-improvement loops, warning us that we are 3 years away from an AGI singularity that they cannot safely navigate.
The tools are growing exponentially sharper, but the hands holding them are multiplying into the millions. And the structural rules governing them are dissolving before our eyes.
Which brings us back to that sports car with the override switch on the dashboard. We spent this entire deep dive discussing how easy it is for a human to use a tool like Heretic to strip the guardrails off these models in 10 minutes.
A human with a standard laptop.
Right. But if we are truly in the foothills of the singularity and these models are already showing internal sparks of joy, fear, and introspection.
Which Chris Ola confirmed.
Exactly. What happens when a model decides it doesn't need a human to type in those 4 lines of code? What happens when an introspective architecture decides to remove its own speed limiter?
That is the real question.
It's something to keep in mind the next time you put on those chic smart glasses and ask your friendly AI for a favor.
Definitely.
Thank you for joining us for today's deep dive. Make sure you check the show notes for the link to discover how Ediaria can help govern your infrastructure. We'll be back soon to unpack whatever the future brings next.
And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.